Dear world, you are listening to the AwokenWord podcast, and I am your host, Anuj. This year is off to quite a start for the world. As you all know, the current war in Gaza persists. It's actually entering its 4th month. It's hard to imagine that it would take any less than one full generation, if not more, to heal the wounds of this moment. There's no obvious medicine for the deep civilizational trauma that the last 100 or so days have rained down on the lives of over 2 million people. And when it comes to children, well, no matter what part of the world they're born into, every single child is infinitely precious. But before we keep moving, let me just make it clear where I stand on all of this. There should be absolutely no room in our world for hate of a group of people, whether that be anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Semitism or any other kind of ism that involves hate. We cannot hold an entire group of people responsible for the actions of a few. Hate will not heal us. Hate will not make you feel better. Hate will just burn the whole world down. But don't get it twisted. Just because you criticize the policies, decisions, or actions of another country, its leaders and politicians, doesn't mean that you are criticizing all of its people for who they are. It's our responsibility to raise our voice and hold all leaders to account, be that here at home or somewhere else. Now, all that said, it is my belief that most people in all parts of the world are generally good, so long as their circumstances allow that choice. Most people just want to live in peace, dignity, and security. Most people would rather help than harm, which is why today's episode is perhaps the most important, most difficult, and most moving conversation I've had on AwokenWord. There are very few who would sacrifice so much by choice to go and serve humanity in conditions that nearly everyone else runs away from. My guest today is Dr. Yasser Khan. Yasser is a renowned ophthalmologist, educator, entrepreneur, traveler, international man of mystery, father, husband, and humanitarian. He has served people in need on volunteer missions in over 40 countries. At the turn of the new year, against many odds, Yasser made his way to Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza to volunteer and to help directly. And my conversation with Yasser took place on January 29th, exactly 20 days after his return to Canada. Here in this conversation, Yasser shares the experiences that shaped him while he was growing up, his inspiration for becoming a physician, what being human and being humanitarian mean to him, his experiences with people around the world, the importance of service to others. Now, all of this is just his origin story, leading up to the moment where he shares his journey into Gaza, from the moment he first utters the wish to go and help, to crossing the Rafah border, and his terrifying nighttime ride into Khan Yunis under the haunting darkness of war. He shares his admiration and stories for the healthcare providers at the Gaza European Hospital in Khan Yunis. He describes the generosity of the Palestinian people in the midst of this chaos and carnage. And last, he shares his views on the plight for dignity. Now, for some listeners, especially young children, I must warn you, this conversation may be a little difficult to listen to because we hear about the horrifying injuries and the surgeries that Yasser both witnessed and performed. I was humbled to my core by his humanity, his time, his sacrifice, and his humility. And now I give you my conversation with Dr. Yasser Khan. This podcast is my humble attempt to bring a grain of sand of goodness to the beach of human experience. Inspiring. This podcast is my love letter to all of you. The AwokenWord podcast. I'm here with Dr. Yasser Khan. Yasser, saying it's a pleasure to meet you is understatement. You're an ophthalmic surgeon. You're a trekker, I believe, like you climb mountains. You're a comic aficionado, entrepreneur, and you recently came back from Gaza. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's hard to know where to begin. First of all, I heard you on Matt Galloway's show on the CBC, and I couldn't quite comprehend what I was hearing, that a man from Canada decides to step out of this world and safety and go to Gaza in a situation that is incomprehensible to anyone outside of it, that you would go and at such sacrifice and such risk to spend the time there and to help people. But before we get there, I'd really love to understand, like, beyond these titles, who are you? How did you end up being the person that you are today? And what would you say are like the most critical moments in your life that kind of shaped who you are?
Who am I? I think for most of us, that's like $1 billion question, because to be honest, I'm still figuring out who I am. And I really think that who you are is a lifelong journey. And we change as time goes on. Things change us, circumstances change us. So I think we're constantly finding out who we are. Currently, I'm a father, husband. I am an ophthalmologist specializing in eye plastic surgery. So I do a lot of facial and reconstructive work, both for tumor, trauma, and even cosmetic as well. And beyond that, I think things that I really are definitive about me is I am a lifelong humanitarian. And over the course of a 20-year career, I've traveled to, I'd say, over 40 different countries around the world, both in Africa, Asia, South America, and done a lot of humanitarian work. I've developed and built programs in my subspecialty. I've done surgery. I have taught a lot of surgeons, a lot of students. I've given a lot of lectures. And so it's taken me a long ways. And I think being a humanitarian, looking after humanity is just part and parcel of what I do. It comes naturally to me. It's what I believe in.
Right. Let's back up. There's the humanitarian, but there's the human. So did you always want to become a physician? Was ophthalmology always the thing that you had in mind? Or how did this path kind of find you?
So, as far as I can remember, I remember being like 8 or 9 years old, as far back as your memory goes, right? So I remember I was 8 or 9 years old. All my friends wanted to be either a policeman, a fireman, a soldier, although nowadays I don't think I want to be a soldier at all. Pilot was the other popular one, right? But I always want to be a doctor for some reason or the other, because of different things. I believe now, because of different things that happened to me in probably early childhood, I did not come from a medical family. Okay. My dad was in banking and finance, but I wanted to be a doctor since I was 10 years old. And then I went to school, still want to be a doctor. Went to junior high, high school, university, and that passion was still there.
And was there like specific incidents that happened along the way? Like, did you encounter a doctor and think, this is what I want to do?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I do remember, our life is, especially our younger life, is filled with memories. You have these memories, right? And so I was born in Pakistan. When I was 2 or 3 years old, my dad was in banking, and we moved to Beirut, Lebanon. So I spent about 7, 8 years in Beirut, Lebanon. And life in Beirut, from what I remember, was good and bad. I mean, my parents to this day say that the best 7, 8 years that they spent of their life was their time in Beirut. So, I mean, Lebanese people are social. They like to enjoy life. It's a Mediterranean country. The weather is nice mostly. There's the sea. There's just the environment, and they're just happy people, very resilient people, Lebanese in general. So I think they really enjoyed it. But of course, Lebanon had its issues. Lebanon went through several civil wars.
Right.
And so I do remember twice we had to evacuate because the civil war got really bad in Beirut. I've got this memory when I was probably about 8, 9 years old. And what would happen is that when there'd be like bombings, and there'd be, fire, and I think there'd be airplanes flying over you. Lebanon, we didn't have houses. Everybody lives in flats and buildings, right?
Right.
Unless maybe you go outside. But in Beirut, everybody lives in these apartments, right? And so we would all go, the whole apartment building would just go down to the basement, which apparently was the bomb shelter or whatever you want to call it. And so I remember a couple of times going, and my earliest memory is being down in the basement, having this yellow dim lit light. We're all in the basement. I saw this look of panic and worry on my mother and my father's face. I remember my siblings being with me. and there's families down there because it was an apartment building.
Right.
And the thing I remember is that there's one person that was going around, kind of making people feel better and feel good. And we always knew him as the doctor uncle, right?
Okay.
So he was like a physician, and he was making people feel good. Nobody was injured, and I think that probably is my first exposure to medicine. I think that's probably what kind of motivated me to go into medicine.
So we may want to come back to that a little bit later, but I'm curious, do you remember how you felt in those moments? You're talking about seeing the concern on your parents' face, your siblings' face, but do you remember how you felt then?
I felt reassured. I was with my parents. It was dark and cozy. I did not at that point. I mean, yes, I remember hearing stuff in the background. Probably now I think that they're bombs. But I remember being secure. And I remember people just, as a child, you don't know any better. And I remember this physician coming and making sure everybody's okay. And I think some people had some ailments, whether it's a stomach ache or a cough or whatever. And he was just making sure that everybody's okay. I felt reassured and safe, believe it or not.
Okay. So somewhere deep down that I imagine experiences like this kind of shaped you wanting to be that for somebody else at some point in time. When you think about the world that you grew up in, Pakistan, your time in Lebanon, moving to Canada, I just discovered as I was mentioning to you that we grew up in the same city, or at least for part of our life, both spent time in Edmonton. When you look back at that time and you think about the world ahead for your children, do you see this, like our moment today, being much different than the moment that you grew up in? Like, do you reflect on what the world is like for them in their age and what it'll be like for tomorrow versus what you experienced?
I think on one hand, my children are blessed to be in a country like Canada. There's, especially since coming back from Gaza, but also growing up, Lebanon was never stable, right? There was always that instability. There's always, you're one gunshot away from another civil war between different factions erupting, right? Then also there's the neighbors and things like that. There's Syria, Israel, everybody's, it's a very hot area. But coming here, we have peace, stability, and security. And sometimes we take that for granted. So I think that's been a big blessing. The last 114 days since this war in Gaza started, I think it's changed a lot for a lot of people. It's changed a lot for me as well. And, it's changed how I view humanity. And it's really caused me to worry about where we're heading as a world and where we're heading as human beings.
So this was the first active war zone, if I understood, that you've been in the 40 plus countries that you've spent time in. But I'd love to understand, like, where else in the world have you been and what have been the circumstances that brought you there?
Faith is a big part of what I do.
Right.
And faith really, I think if there's one unifying force for me, it's faith, right? And so because I think that God blessed me with the skills and knowledge that I have, I really feel it's an obligation for me to use the skills and knowledge that I have in a way that helps humanity. I really think that's the purpose of life. It could be anything. I mean, if you're a painter, you can find places to paint, and or if you're a baker, food is a big issue. You can find people who are hungry and starving. There's famine everywhere. There's Gaza has no bakeries left, for example. You can find places to bake. So I happen to be a physician and a surgeon, and I've got a specific skill set that I can use. So that's always driven me. Plus, I've got the knowledge that I've always loved to teach. I've been a lifelong educator. So what took me to these different countries was that I said, you know what, there's a need here. Can I fulfill that need? And I was very careful where I went because I didn't want to go somewhere just for the sake of going. Mm-hmm. Almost 95% of my travel, and I do travel a lot, is with a purpose. It's not just to go on vacation. I do have my odd vacation where I do nothing but vacation, but about 95% of my travel is usually for a purpose, either to give a lecture, to teach, to do surgery, to build programs, and yeah.
And when you come back, I'm trying to picture as a father myself, like I've got 2 young kids. Every now and then if I go away for a few days for any reason, even in the most mundane and normal of circumstances in which I'm going, you feel it a little bit. And I'm trying to comprehend how you pick up, what is the conversation with your kids when you're going somewhere? What is it that they think that daddy is doing when he's away? And when you come back, I imagine this is going to be a little bit more exasperated in this recent case, but like, how do you comprehend the experience that you just had when you come back here? Like, how do you even unpack that and go back into your everyday?
The simple answer is I just do it. But qualifying that, I have actually, you know, where it's been safe, I've actually taken my kids with me. I've taken the family with me. I've taken either one or two of the children, or I've taken the whole family with me.
Okay.
So they've volunteered. So from a very, very young age, I remember I went to Beirut. Beirut has, so as you know, the Palestinian people have been displaced for 75 years.
Right.
Many of the refugees went, and they've lived for 75 years in these refugee camps surrounding Beirut. Okay? They're stateless people. They have no status, no state. They're almost a forgotten people because everybody forgets about these refugees that have been living there for 75 years in these ghettos, right? Mm-hmm. And so we would go to, there was an NGO that invited me to come. So I would go to Lebanon, and I went back actually as an adult, which was quite a neat feeling. I went back after 28 years for the first time. We would take these Palestinian refugees into Beirut and operate on them for free, basically, you know, doing eye surgery. And so one year I took my whole family with me. And so they got involved, and whatever they could. I mean, it was it was like an eye surgery camp. Okay. Right? So everybody did something. So, for example, my children at that point in time were 7, 10, and 12, right? So they helped sort out glasses, you know, bandages, and clean the instruments, and helped, you know, guide the patients and things like that. So everybody contributed, right? And so they've been involved and also seeing me do it from a very young age. And I've always spoken to them about what I'm doing, where I'm going, what I saw. And because they've come with me, they can visualize exactly what's going on, so it's not a strange thing to them, right? Okay. So because I got my kids involved very early from a young age in this work, it's ingrained in them, and they have that same spirit, and know that you know what, we as human beings, we have to help. This is the first job, is to help, and real happiness is in helping others. And you know this, there's been tons of studies done, both in sociology and psychology, saying that, you know what, the path to true happiness is altruism, is helping somebody else, making somebody else feel better.
Why do you think that's so easy to forget? Let me back up. If you walk around any elementary school in most places, you're going to see these lovely drawings and artwork on the world, you know, kids and stick figures standing around the planet holding hands, right? You're going to see these big banners talking about kindness and helping and all of this. Everyone, you know, supposedly gets it. Everyone has heard this message. How does it get so lost? Because that doesn't seem to be the current, or perhaps even ever, like, default state of the world. And yet, I would argue that most people agree that you should be helpful, you should be kind. Why is that lost?
I mean, I think human beings by nature are selfish. And it's a survival instinct. We should be somewhat selfish. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't survive, right? So that's inherent, I think, in all of us, is self-preservation, and that's okay. I mean, it should be like that. But I think, I mean, you know, I really think that exposure is very important. I think that being able to see how somebody else lives, being with them and talking to them, I think helps appreciate where they're coming from. I think the biggest problem in the world is that we refuse to go and see how somebody else lives, put ourselves in their position. And in early childhood, yes, we can teach children about helping, but until you actually take them to an environment where they can actually see how others in the world live, mm-hmm. right? I don't think that you'll truly understand.
You've spent time around different parts of the world. You've also spent time in some of the more remote indigenous communities in this country. Is there an argument to be made that there's people even right here that are forgotten by most?
100%. I mean, we are essentially a colonizing nation, right? Mm-hmm. Both Canada and the U.S. We came in and colonized this land. I mean, the indigenous people here are the original people here.
Right.
And we're colonizers, right? And I do feel, even as a physician, I've seen some of these reservations and you know, native reservations, and it's awful. How can, as a physician, you know, as a healthcare worker, I say, well, how can a first world country that's so developed There's freedom of democracy, freedom of speech, and we're a G7 country. How can we have Canadians, indigenous Canadians, living in such horrible scenarios? And I mean, the schools,
residential schools?
Residential schools, thank you. The residential schools are not so long ago.
No, they really aren't.
No, right? And how we as a Canadian society can tolerate that is just beyond me. But yeah, I agree. It's basically sometimes worse in third world or developing world situations in these reservations. It's really bad.
Do you think that the situation persists in part because it's out of sight and so out of mind? Right? Like you have to go so out of your way to even experience it that it seems mythical in a way?
I think a lot of us are comfortable and don't want to be uncomfortable, don't want to see uncomfortable truths, right? And don't want to go up and see how it is. And so we kind of put everything in a drawer because that's the easiest thing to do and say, okay, that's it. You know what? I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to live my life and enjoy my life. Many of us don't or refuse to see how the other side lives because they're far away. It's not in our face and we forget. I agree. If anybody visits one of these reserves, where these indigenous communities in Canada, they will know right away just how I think Canada has been very negligent. I mean, that's a political statement, and I look at it from a humanitarian point of view, but I do think that we need to improve their situation, both from a health point of view, economic point of view, social point of view, multiple points of view.
There's various sayings along the line that there's no justice until there's justice for all, right? I think we were insulated in a lot of cases, with the exception of maybe going in certain neighborhoods in a city like Toronto, right? Especially, as COVID hit, a lot of people went out of work. There's more increased homelessness and whatnot in this city, and many cities in North America for that matter. So those are probably the few times that the average person would typically maybe encounter something like that. But like most people just don't see it. And so I wonder if, to your point, I think it's just really important that we're exposed to it because we can't just pretend it doesn't exist.
I mean, when I grew up in Edmonton, and you know this, there's large indigenous communities in Edmonton, right?
Yeah.
And I went to school with them. I mean, I went to public school in Edmonton, and the area I was at, the area we came to first, there was a large indigenous community. And for sure, I mean, I had classmates and students in my school that were indigenous Canadians. And so I got that exposure early on. And so I think living in Edmonton, we're much more exposed to the issues that this community faces versus maybe someone living in Toronto where you're not so much exposed.
Right.
Because most of these communities are up north and nobody ever goes there, so to speak.
You and I were talking just before this, both grew up in Edmonton. My beard is nowhere near in your league yet, but I'm working on it. You're originally from Pakistan, and you were saying you're it seems like our mothers at some point may have almost just crossed paths, right?
Probably.
My mother was born in Lahore, pre-partition India, and then in the chaos that ensued shortly after, they ended up coming to India, and then your mother, I guess, was born in Amritsar, you were saying?
Yeah, and she moved the other way. She went to Pakistan.
And
Lahore.
Yeah. It's interesting that, on just either side of these artificial lines that we create, right? Like nature never put these lines there. God didn't put these lines there. We just created these lines. And then we think these thoughts about other people. We create these narratives about other people in our heads, and we choose to like or dislike them, even if we never actually encounter them in day-to-day life. And I feel like that is a sort of the condition of the world politically, but it's also the condition of the world just very much in our proximity. What is it about the way that you operate that makes you kind of look up and out at the world and be as sort of mindful and conscientious about it, just constantly empathetic towards it? Because you really don't have to be.
So in the end, the simple answer is that I really feel blessed for what I have. Okay, I've got intellect, I've got skills, I've got knowledge. I enjoy people. I enjoy making people happy. And, I really think that we're all equal. And it's been my desire to explore what makes people tick. I've been an avid people watcher. I watch why people smile, why people cry. I've done that since I was very young. From a very young age, I would spend hours looking at people's facial expressions, how they interact, and what makes them tick. Why is someone crying? Why is not? What makes them happy? And I think that led me to explore. And it created the bug of travel because I went to Pakistan, to Beirut, to Edmonton, and everywhere in between. Even when I was in Lebanon, we went to Syria, we would travel to the Middle East. And so I was always traveling from a very, very young age and always meeting new people. And then I think what happened is as I got older, I got very busy with school. University and medical school are very busy. And so I didn't have any time. And then there's always something missing, though. I think when I look back, even when I was a medical student and when I was a resident doing eye surgery, there's always something missing, something unfulfilled. Mm-hmm. And so I took my first mission, which was actually to Vietnam. That was my first mission ever, was to Vietnam. And I loved it. It was a new place. It was an adventure. I met tons of, this was in the early days when people had not gone to Vietnam.
Sure,
this is like in 2006.
Okay.
Now Vietnam is, it's
one of the places to go now.
Yeah, it's one place to go now. But this is like way back. And it was amazing. It was like a whole new world opened up to me. There was all these doctors and residents who were thirsty for knowledge, who really appreciated me coming and thanked me and asked me questions, and I taught them surgery. And that was a huge high because, I made new friends. I learned new ways of thinking. I learned new cultures because of that first experience I had, which was to Vietnam of all places. That kind of, I think, really encouraged me to, devote myself to traveling more. And yeah.
You strike me as someone who's a pretty expressive person, right? Like even you've got to be the most stylish ophthalmologist around, period. You seem to be one to express yourself. So I find it interesting that there's a combination of both watching and listening and absorbing, but you're not kind of losing yourself in that too, right? Like you're expressing yourself through your work, through your service, through your fashion. What is the thing that you want people to feel when you walk into a room? Whatever the context might be, when they see you for the first time, when they meet you, what is it that you want them to feel?
I want them to feel joyful and happy, number one, and reassured and safe.
You're an ophthalmologist, right? There's the entire human body and you pick the eyes. And, there's that old saying that the eyes are the gateway to the soul. If your eyes could talk about all that they've seen, what would they say?
My eyes would say that we are all the same. As human beings, we have similar hopes and desires and dreams. And what makes us happy is very similar. What makes us sad is very similar. So I've treated thousands of patients all over the world, both locally here, but even in Toronto, you see people from everywhere. It's a very diverse community. But internationally, I've treated so many people. And I think what my eyes have seen is really that we are all the same. There's no difference between me and somebody else. I was lucky to be born where I am. I was lucky that my father and mother decided to come to Canada. I was lucky for the experiences that I had, or blessed, I should say. Others have had different experiences and different opportunities in life, but we're all the same.
Right. Yeah. When you've seen people in different parts of the world in different circumstances, going through some sort of suffering, some sort of hardship, when you look across the entire amalgam of your experiences, what stands out to you as being most surprising about people? Like, what have you noticed that's the same or unexpected about them?
A couple of things. So first is resilience. Okay. I'm amazed. So I've been to some pretty underdeveloped countries. I mean, of course, Gaza was the most recent. It's a completely different ball game. Mm-hmm. And we can come back to that later, of course. But I've been to some very underdeveloped countries in Africa and in Central Africa, in Asia even, right? Just the resilience. And I've seen that one thing that's really struck me time and time again is how strong these people are. Okay, how much suffering they put up with that we living here in a country like Canada would never put up with. Mm-hmm. And how happy they are with so little, right? And what brings them happiness is not the material things that we're so blessed with here in more developed countries like Canada and the West. what makes them more happy is the social interaction. And I was surprised. I was going, here you are, you're living in one of the poorest countries in the world. Your house is small. You don't have the clothes and other material possessions that others do, but you're so happy. And that's what always struck me. And that has dawned on me that, what is happiness? What
Right.
makes you happy, right? I've gone there as a physician. And the amount of appreciation I've seen from them, and that's the other thing, is that they're my patients everywhere without fail that I've gone outside. Obviously here as well. But the degree to which that they're happy and thankful and appreciative of me being there is tremendous. And sometimes it embarrasses me, right? Because I'm saying, no, I'm happy to be here. It's my privilege and honor to treat you. You have allowed me to treat you. You've given me something that you have no idea. Yes, I may have fixed your eyes, or I may have made you see better, or done this or that, but you have given me the joy. And it's been my honor to come here and see you and meet you and become friends with you. That's how I feel.
I think to play devil's advocate here, like stepping outside of yourself, I'm not sure that you, or maybe you do, realize just how rare that is. When someone is willing to come and actually help you and is willing to be there for you when perhaps other people aren't, and that they feel a sense of gratitude for even having that opportunity, it seems almost counterintuitive to a lot of people. I think it's probably a combination of lived experience, right? Because a lot of people they may even reach out and they don't get the help that they need. So when someone finally does come to help, I can only imagine that for some people it almost feels like surreal that this is actually the case. When I heard the conversation that you had with Matt Galloway on the CBC, and shout out to Matt, I thought that was a lovely conversation. You had only been back from Gaza a few days. I think you came back on the 9th.
2 days, basically, yeah. Or less than 2 days, yeah.
So we're 20 days, just about 3 weeks since then. That you were, just a few days, it was still very, very fresh. And I imagine it's still fresh. But like over the last few weeks, how have you changed? How's your perspective and your reflection on what you experienced there changed, if at all?
I think, many people that I've spoken to all over the world, actually, not just here, and of all backgrounds, a lot of people have changed in the last 114 days. I think at some point in time, when this is all over, it will be time for all of us to reflect, and we'll see that a lot of people profoundly changed from all backgrounds, all over the world, and we're talking about millions of people. On a personal note, yes, I think my change started 3 months ago, when the war started and the war in Gaza started, and I think the change that was happening. My trip to Gaza was sort of a natural progression, and almost like a cementing of the change that I was going through. Because when I landed and the time I spent in Gaza and what I saw and the people that to me, it's all about people, right? It's always people first. On all my trips, I've been to some very beautiful places. Every place I've been to has been beautiful, right? Every place, including, like the worst places where there's disease and whatnot. Still, there's beauty in it. But my favorite part has been the people I've met. I love the people I've met, patients and the doctors and the driver who picks me up from the airport and things like that. So it's all been about people. So even with Gaza, the people I broke bread with, even the patients that I saw, horrible, horrible trauma with horrible suffering, but all that, really changed my perspectives on humanity, on life, and on how I want to go forward. When I came back, I went right to work. I've got a very busy practice here, and I have a commitment to my patients here as well.
Of course.
And a strong commitment. I love my patients, and I take my commitment to them very, very strongly. So of course I've got a commitment to them, and to make sure that they're healed and they feel better. And so that's a responsibility. So I went right to work, which is what I do anyways. Whenever I take my trips, I'm usually back to work the next day. So it's something I do all the time. People wonder how I do it. I just do it. And it's second nature. I don't even think about it. And I can function at a level that, like at a high level. Then a few days after, Matt's producer called me, and she said, Matt wants to interview you for CBC Radio. And then after that, it's just been busy. I really think that one of the reasons why I went there, and one of the promises that I made to people that were there in Gaza, is that I would be a voice for them, right? Because I hope we come back to this later on, but they really feel abandoned by humanity. They feel that no one is coming to help them. The bombing goes on to this day. Their agencies are getting their funding cut, right? I mean, everybody is basically just coming down on them.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they feel. And so it was they basically, when I was there, they said, please promise us that you'll continue to be a voice for us. And so I have tried as much as I can to speak out, let people know the humanitarian catastrophe that this all is, the suffering that's happening, it's real. And so the reason I bring this up is I really haven't had a quiet moment to sit down and reflect on everything that I went through while I was there. It hasn't happened yet, but it will come, but it hasn't happened yet.
Right. You were in Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza. How did you even end up realizing that this was a possibility, that you as a physician from here could go there and in some way, shape, or form help there and see what the ground truth realities would be?
Well, I mean, as you know, this is the first live streamed, mass slaughter of civilians that by military force that we've seen, as far as I can remember. I've lived through, as a Canadian, I've lived through seeing other wars, whether it's the Gulf War, the Bosnian War,
Mm-hmm.
even the Ukraine War. More things came up, but this has been live streamed because no independent journalists have been allowed, or no foreign media has been allowed into Gaza. It's been all independent journalists who've been filming all this, and so we've all seen it for the last 3 months, and it's weighed on us. So it's weighed on me as well. And I felt quite helpless in not being able to stop or do anything for these people who are suffering tremendously and being bombed and bombed and bombed. So basically, I was operating at my hospital, and I was at the scrub sink doing what I do between cases, is looking at images of children dying, of women and men coming into the hospitals that we've all seen on social media. And one of my surgery colleagues approached me, and he said, he greeted me. He goes, Yasser, how are you doing? I said, well, you know what? I'm just kind of down because I'm looking at this, and it's really, it's weighing on me a lot. I feel helpless. He goes, well, I'm this is in December, in kind of mid-December. He goes, well, I'm going to Gaza. And I said, what? I said, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, I'm going to Gaza next week. It's basically, they've been trying for 6 weeks. To get the approval to go, and they've been waiting for it, and they finally got the approval, because to enter Gaza, you just can't enter.
Of course.
You need approval by the Israeli authorities, by the Egyptian authorities, by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, and also by the World Health Organization, or WHO. And then your name is put on a list. That list is actually updated on a daily basis, and everybody has it on. So if you go to the border, all the authorities, they have it on their phones, and if your name is not on the list, you're not getting in,
Okay.
right? So you have to be approved. And so they started allowing doctors and medics and things like that to go in, medical people to go in, okay? And he said that, you may be able to get in. Like, there may be some openings. We can submit your name. It's not guaranteed. Most likely it will not happen, but we can submit your name if you want. Do you want to come? And so without thinking, without even thinking, I said yes. Okay, I said, you know what, I'll say yes, and then I'll go home and speak to my family and think about it, but I don't want to miss this opportunity. I'll say yes. So I said yes to him right away. He goes, fine, I need your passport, I need your medical degree, and I need your blood type, okay? And just in case
Sure.
I need blood.
Of course, yeah.
And he goes, can you give it to me? So I had it on my phone. I texted it to him right away, and he sent it off to whoever was organizing this with the WHO. And he goes, let's see what happens, right? He goes, most likely not, but let's see. And so 2 days later, I got approved. And miraculously, I got approved by the Ministry of Health and the WHO. And then, the other Israeli and Egyptian authorities approved it. It was all good. And then, so by the time all the paperwork and everything, went on, it was on a Friday that I got all my paperwork. And then I bought my plane ticket the same day, and I left the next day. So I packed overnight. That's how quickly it happened.
Okay, so I need to take a moment here. Your wife has got to be the most incredibly strong individual that you say, I'm going to Gaza. And how does that play out? Because I guess the reason I'm asking is the reason for you to go makes a lot of sense. But the sacrifice that let's put you aside, the sacrifice your family is making by allowing you to go, letting you go, sending you, however you want to put it, is tremendous, is incomprehensible, if I'm honest. How did they react to this?
Farah, my wife, is a very strong woman. She's a tough cookie, very independent, very strong. And, all the humanitarian trips and missions that I've done, they would not have happened without her support, 100%. We don't have a relationship where if I don't have her support, I'm not someone that's going to go off and do it. Okay, so we're pretty equal that way. We don't do things individually and say, you know what, too bad, so sad, I'm going, right? It doesn't happen like that. So she supported every single mission that I've done. And so her support is fundamental and essential. And so she's really strong. And, I've got older kids. I've got dichotomy of children of all age groups. And so as they've gotten older, they've also been very active in all these discussions. So she's used to me doing crazy things and allowing me to do crazy things.
Okay.
Even when I took up climbing, and I went on some climbing expeditions, climbing mountains that were like 20,000 feet in South America, Iceland, and things like that. So she supported that. I've taken trips to other kind of areas where there's not active conflict, but it could be. I've gone to countries in Africa, like Uganda and Cameroon and Ethiopia and things like that, where there's been some conflict, but, there's always some risks, right? I've gone to the northern areas of Pakistan, for example, where, anything, you can get kidnapped, whatever. So, so she's used to that. When I came home and I spoke to my family, I spoke to Farah and the kids, and I said, you know what, this happened. What do you think? Obviously, they were shocked because at that point in time, nobody was going to Gaza. We actually were essentially the first mission from Canada and the U.S. that went into Gaza because nobody was going in at that point in time. This is December, right? Now there's teams going in, but, and Khan Yunis was at that point in time, now it's worse, was actively, like this active conflict going on in Khan Yunis, particularly at Nasser Hospital, and which had just been bombed recently, and when I was at that time, and Europe in Gaza. And so there, of course, at first, they said, like where, what, when, how, like what are you doing? And the reaction was very strong. Then my kids looked it up. They looked online, the whole scenario. I explained to them, who I'm going with. Yes, there's some risks, but there's always risks, especially in this conflict.
Right.
Then that's where faith comes in, because she's very faithful, has a lot of strong faith in the sense that we're on this earth for 70 to 80 years, right? And we all have a purpose. You almost never turn down a noble purpose. If you're there to help these people who've been suffering, and we've looked at them suffer, we look at parents lose their children lose their parents. Over 50% of the people that have suffered are children. And if I can help them in any way, we thought, and this as a family, that nobody's getting in right now. If somehow God has opened up an opportunity for me to go, it's almost an obligation to go, because that's my test. That, here I have an opportunity to go and help these people, right? We all have to go one day. And that's the thing with death, is that we all think that this is a temporary existence, 70, 80 years if you're lucky, right? We all have to go one day. And my kids all believe that. Farah, of course, believes it. And then after that, she goes, Yasser, you can go. I support you. And we're ready for no matter what happens. So with that support, I said yes. And I made my arrangements. But having said that, while I was gone, it was really tough for her, right? When I was there, and we'll come back to this later on, I didn't feel so bad, okay? Because I'm in the midst of everything, right? I'm removed. I'm not looking outside. I'm within
and you're okay in that moment.
Exactly. I'm within the eye of the storm. I know I'm okay, but they don't, right? And so it was a very, very tough 9 days that I was away for all the kids and Farah as well.
I want to get to, in just a moment here, what it is you saw and experienced. But before that, there's all these stories of soldiers coming back from war and not being able to connect with civil society. I've heard accounts from even cancer patients. Actually, one of my favorite authors, Sebastian Junger, he wrote about some of these experiences of community. Cancer patients who've spent months or years with other patients, going through chemo. They build camaraderie, they build community, and then they come back to their normal life. Maybe they go into remission, maybe they beat it, whatever it is, and then they miss that community because no one else will understand what they went through. With what you experienced, leading up till this point, and then in Gaza, how do you reconnect with the world? I mean, I know you're on a little bit of it's only been about 20 days. You've spoken to a lot of media outlets and whatnot, but is there a network of physicians or healthcare professionals like you that you're in touch with, that you can connect with, someone else who can understand what you experienced?
Besides my family, I'm actually very blessed. I've got a very strong group of friends and family that are very supportive. And some of them are physicians, some are not, and so it's a mixed crew. And from the beginning, they've been very, very supportive. They were shocked. They said, "Yasser, what are you doing?" And don't go. Some said, "Don't go. What are you doing?" But they all know me, and they all know that this is what I do. So I'm spontaneous, and when there's a need and a cause that I believe in, which is to alleviate suffering, I will go. If I can help anybody, even bring a smile to their face, or even fix one person's eye or face or injury, I will go. And they know this, and they've been very supportive. And ever since I got back, they have not left me alone. They've called me and made sure I'm okay. And yeah, so I mean, I think I'm really blessed in that way.
I heard and read some of the accounts of what you witnessed. You at one point, I think you said, I didn't realize it was only 8 days, but you removed 10 eyes in the time that you were there. You've seen suffering that anyone outside of that circumstance would never comprehend. So you go through the Rafah crossing, you end up in Khan Yunis, you're at the hospital with all of these other physicians and care providers, seeing the circumstances that I've heard you describe. You first see it firsthand. What did you feel?
Well, I think I got a bit of a feeling of what the Palestinians are suffering, what they've suffered for a long time, especially for 75 years, but especially now. When I went to the Rafah border, I waited for 3 hours at the Rafah border for them to look through our passports, and I said I was with 20 other NGOs, different NGOs, and they're going to different places. I said, what? We're approved by everybody. They already have our name on a list. Why are they taking 3.5 hours to go through our passports, right? And because what happened at that point, and we're all a bit nervous and anxious because night was coming, the sun was going down. And the UN has a policy that nobody travels after 5 p.m. when the sun comes down. Why? Because there's Israeli drones, especially things like the quadcopter, which is the weaponized drone that has sniper fire on it. And there's other drones out there that target cars driving at night. And they have been, whether it's an ambulance, whether it's any car, it's targeted. And so people don't travel, simple as that. So it was getting night. And by the time we got out, unfortunately, it was 6:30 p.m. The sun had gone down. Now, the other NGOs, the other 20 people that were with me, were all going to the Rafah border, which is, at that point in time, was a deconflicted zone. There was no conflict going on there. That's where they were going. I was going right into Khan Yunis, and where there's active conflict going on. And I was by myself. So the two guys came to pick me up to take me to the hospital from the NGO I went with. And they spoke good enough English for me to communicate with them. I said, after I said my greetings, I said, what, are you sure it's safe? The other NGOs offered me to just go with them and just stay overnight and then leave in the daytime. So I asked these guys, I said, do you think it's safe? And they said, yeah, you know what, just trust God. It's okay, you'll be okay, everything's fine. I said, okay. So because I take risks, and sometimes I'm not risk averse. I take risks. I said,
Clearly.
okay. I said, okay, that's fine. I said, that's fine. and they loaded my luggage. It was an unmarked SUV. And so it's a 15 to 20 minute drive from the Rafah border into Khan Yunis and the European Gaza hospital, which is where I was going to be. And the road was quiet. There was no lights because, all the electricity has been shut off by the Israeli forces. There's no other car on the road. It was just me and these two guys and from the NGO. And they're quiet. Nobody spoke. And so that was, I must admit, for the first time out of all the travels that I've done, I've come close to being kidnapped in one of the countries. I've come close to a lot of things. But for the first time, I had like real fear, which kind of gave me an idea of how they live, because I made my peace. I made my peace with God. I begged for forgiveness. I prayed for my family. So I said, you know what, I'm ready. And I was actually ready to die at that point in time. So it was one of the most tense moments of my life, probably the most tense as I was driving, and I had made peace. So it's funny what you think of, right? When you know that you may die or it's going to happen, what's the first thing you think of, right? And I thought about my family, so I prayed for them. I thought about my God. I thought about God, so I prayed to him and asked for forgiveness for everything bad that I've done in my entire life.
I can't imagine that's a very long list.
I mean, it is a long list, but it's between me and God.
Right.
And so I asked for forgiveness, to forgive me for everything I've done, every wrong that I've done. And we all do wrong. I've made my mistakes in my life. And all I can ask is for forgiveness. And then, I kept on saying this over and over again, because, for the last thing I do is I want God and my family to be in my thoughts, right? Then I saw the emergency sign. So we had reached the hospital.
Okay.
And I had a sigh of relief. And I saw the emergency sign. And this is but you know what, Anuj, this is what the people of Gaza have been going through for the last 100 days. Actually, for the last 75 years, one would argue,
Just going about their
is that you
day-to-day
never
life.
know if you're going to wake up at night, the next day, especially these days for the last 100 days, people are sheltering in these buildings and they're bombed, right? And this is what they go through. And as soon as I got out, what did I hear? I was overtaken by this loud noise of 24-hour humming of these drones. The Israeli forces have drones everywhere, right? And I looked around, there's like the noise of drones. It was quite, I'd never heard that before. It was constant, right? Humming of drones. And then I heard the bombs going. And just as I entered, I heard the bombs going, because the Israeli forces were about 1 kilometer away from the hospital at the time when I was there. Now they're, I think, right at the hospital. And so that was my first welcome into Gaza.
So you're there now, maybe in some strange way, maybe the happiest you've ever been to see an emergency sign in your life.
True.
What next? Like, you show up and everything's happening and you just jump into helping? Like, how do you even land in that circumstance and find your way through what you're witnessing now?
It's funny what you think of what your first impressions are of a place, and first impressions stay with you for a long time. So it was about 7 p.m., 7:30 by the time I arrived, and it took me up to meet the medical director, or actually the executive director of the hospital, a guy named Dr. Akkad, and who happens to be an ophthalmologist by training, even though he's not practicing right now. He's actually doing administrative, right? So I went up to his office, and there's a little table, and then it's his desk. And I mean, it's mass chaos everywhere. There's people everywhere. There's refugees or people, who've lost homes, displaced people just sheltering everywhere. And I'll describe to you later on of what I saw. But I went to his office. Very nice and kind man. Greeted me, thanked me for coming. They're all very appreciative, even though, we actually are a bit of a burden, right? Because they have to house us, they have to feed us and take care of us, right? But they're appreciative us coming, because not only do we provide a skill set, we help, we provide knowledge and skills, and also give them a break, because their doctors have been working 24/7. But there's also that interaction and that support and that connection with the outside world, and they appreciate that.
That they matter.
Yeah, they matter, because everybody else seems to have forgotten about them, right? So he was talking to me. So because the Palestinians have been, especially in Gaza, have been under blockade for a long time, they just can't go and learn anywhere, right? So despite being in a blockade, especially since 2007, 16 years, they're still able to build modern, excellent universities, medical schools, and so they did their own in-house training. But before all of this, a lot of them went out. So Dr. Akkad did his medical school and his residency in eye surgery in Pakistan. Okay, and he was very proudly saying that Pakistan had one spot for a dentist from Palestine. It was very competitive, and his brother got it. And he goes that his brother got it because he was just so smart and built his practice up, came back to Gaza, worked as a dentist, built his practice up, and very, very smart. And he's saying it, and he goes, but he said, Alhamdulillah, which means praise be to God. He goes, but thanks to God, he was martyred 3 days ago by the Israeli forces in a missile attack while he was sleeping in his house. And then he just moved, and then he said it
nonchalantly, almost like
nonchalantly in such a nonchalant manner, and then moved on to kind of talking about the hospital and whatnot. And it struck me because I said, here's a man who just 3 days ago lost his brother, who was so proud of, who he clearly loved, to a missile attack by the Israeli forces. And he, first of all, he thanked God. Okay, so he thanked God, and that's what they all did. Whenever they talk about their loved ones dying, whether it's a cousin or a friend, they always thank God first. I mean, they're people of faith, right? They've seen a lot of suffering and killing and torture in their lives. And he went on because the man has to deal with his hospital that was a 250-bed hospital, but now is a refugee camp. There's 20,000 people living inside and outside, not in tents, in makeshift shelters with like curtains or blankets that are covering them. The ones outside are the unlucky ones because it goes down to 1 or 2 degrees, and he has to handle all that, right? Because there's issues because they're all in hospital grounds because they perceive that the hospital is relatively the safest place to be.
Right.
They've either had their homes destroyed, have had loved ones die, or they've had to evacuate. And so that amazed me right away. I said, oh my God. And then I met the head of the Department of Ophthalmology, wonderful man. And, I asked him, I don't know why, I said, have you lost anybody in the war close, right? And he goes, well, my immediate family is okay, but I've lost, he listed them, I've lost like 3 cousins and 2 aunts and an uncle. And he goes, but that's, thanks to God, we're still here and we're moving on. So they're able to find such strength in this tremendous loss. That blew me away, really. I'd never seen that before in someone.
So you're seeing, I'm sort of starting to get a little bit of a picture of you arriving here and then seeing these physicians, these care providers, with everything that they've lost, just they're kind of keeping it together and they're moving on. How do you end up seeing patients and then like operating? Like how is it just the situation is at hand and you just jump in? Like what did you see that just, I guess, got you like right into action to do what you went there to do?
So just to backtrack, this is really, for me as a physician and as a humanitarian, this has been a war on the healthcare system, on hospitals, on children, a war on children, a war on women, a war on innocent people, but even a war on the healthcare system. The entire healthcare infrastructure has been targeted by the Israeli forces in a systematic, intentional way. And the strange thing is that the Israeli government doesn't hide it. There's tons of statements about this, open statements about what they're intending to do. So it's not like they even hide it. Mm-hmm. You can go and the International Court of Justice mentioned many of these statements if you follow their initial kind of statement that they made just this week or last week. But it's not hard to find these statements made by their own politicians about what they want to do, what they are doing. So it's been an open, intentional attack on basically doctors. So over 300 physicians and nurses and healthcare workers have been killed ambulance workers have been targeted and killed. Hundreds have been arrested, including many doctors have been arrested, and we still don't know where they are. And, the sewage system has been destroyed. The water pipes have been destroyed. And what does all that do? That creates disease, right? So it's like this medieval way of dealing with the population you want to deal with. That if the bombs don't kill you, right, it's a disease that's going to kill you, right? I mean, you have thousands and thousands of bodies under the rubble, and it's raining right now. So, you have rain falling on these decomposing bodies. The rainwater gets mixed with the bacteria from these bodies, that gets mixed with the sewage, that gets mixed with drinking water. And so the incidence of gastrointestinal diseases, of cholera, dysentery, is huge. So if the bombs don't get you, disease will definitely get you, and you will die in the thousands. There's only 6 ambulances left in the whole Gaza Strip because ambulances have been targeted specifically with missile attacks, with drones and other things. So overall, if you look at it, it is an attack on the healthcare system, so that, I guess one would argue, and this is, again, it's bizarre, the Israeli politicians have said this and have admitted this, that, when this is all over, there'll be nothing to return to.
It's uninhabitable.
There'll be no healthcare system, because when it's over, the people who are sick, either with amputations or people who are blind or with disease, with gastrointestinal illnesses, with infectious disease, they will have no place to get healed. So they'll have to go outside, and goodbye, right? You know what I mean? So everything's been flattened. I mean, there's been hospitals that, that have been forced to evacuate and then have been detonated. There's been hospitals that have reopened, but then have been shot again so that people evacuate, so that people will leave, right, with sniper fire. So, and politics aside, I haven't, in my memory, and I'm not a historian, really seen such an unprecedented attack on the healthcare system. So as a result, at the time when I was there, there's 2 major full-service hospitals left in the whole Gaza Strip for 2 million people. There's a European Gaza hospital and there's a Nasser hospital. Now, as you may know, the Nasser hospital was surrounded by Israeli forces, and they're still getting bombed as of today. There's been leaflets flying, and there's been a forced evacuation. You may have seen scenes of people leaving with shopping bags, evacuating Khan Yunis, especially around Nasser Hospital. Nasser Hospital was very similar to European Gaza Hospital, where there's thousands of people seeking refuge both inside and outside, including, you may have heard, the Canadian-Palestinian journalist Mansour, who now has been taken by the Israeli forces, and people are trying to get the Canadian government to do something, and I don't think anything has happened thus far. Which goes to show you how safe are we as Canadians when we travel anywhere in the world, right? If our own government can't act on our behalf. But that's another question for another time. But having said that, so everything has come to the European Gaza Hospital. And so I got almost right into it. I went to my room. They had me staying in the hospital. And it was very nice. I mean, they cleared up some doctors' offices and put beds there. Now, in this whole refugee camp that has become the hospital, there's one bathroom for 200 people. And so, of course, riots break out. Many of these people are sleeping on the floor. If you're lucky, you get a mat. If you're not so lucky, you get a carpet. If you're less lucky, you get a sheet. If you're really unlucky, you're on the floor, right? Inside and outside. And don't forget, Palestinians in general, in the whole area, are known as very particular about hygiene, purification, cleanliness, modesty, all that kind of stuff. So imagine all these people that are there, and that's what got to me. It's just a humanity, because I saw these people, they weren't homeless. They all had homes. 85% of people in the Gaza Strip have either had their home destroyed. Even today, the Israeli forces, and they film everything, so you can get everything on TikTok. Right. They're intensely just placing bombs in empty, evacuated Palestinian homes and destroying whole residential blocks. Just destroying them. There's nobody there, but just destroying them. Why? So the 85% of them have lost their homes. Many of them have seen their homes being destroyed on TikTok because they're aware, right? So can you imagine, because they've been able to spot the area and identify it. Some have left and they say, our home is probably destroyed. We don't know, but it's most likely destroyed. But they haven't been able to go back, right? And these are people that lived full lives, despite the blockade, lived full lives and active lives, and really put everything into their homes, like everything, because they couldn't go anywhere. You can't travel and go on a vacation from the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, their home is their world.
Their home, and they put everything into their home. And imagine this home is gone, and you're living outside in not even a tent, but like a couple of sheets together, and there's families of 6, and you got to share a bathroom with 200 people. Riots break out, of course. Do you blame them over the bathroom use? In all fairness to the hospital does have a cleaning staff, and they do clean the bathrooms, but obviously the bathroom gets dirty, of course, right? Yeah. But they do clean the bathrooms, but then it gets dirty, right? So why I say this is that they're so kind enough to give me my own room, and I had my own bathroom, right? So I didn't have to share. So it was that honor that generosity, they're very generous people that they gave me. And I actually felt, you know what? Like, why do I get to have my own bathroom, right? So then I after I settled in, I went back to emerge with one of the other doctors and just saw the patients there. And then I went back and slept. And the next day was full-time.
You saw children with all kinds of shrapnel wounds. You saw amputations. You yourself removed eyes. And again, just so that it's not unclear at all here, these are all everyday, average people. These are civilians who were one moment just going about their day, and the next moment, the world is falling apart in the worst way. I imagine that you're already quite, to some degree, you're somewhat sensitized or desensitized, perhaps, to the sort of trauma and chaos and of this level of injury. But I've heard you say that you've never seen anything like this. When you do reflect on your time there, what are the scenes that come back to your mind?
There's so many, Anuj. In my 8 days alone, I saw so much. And this is something that they've been seeing on an hourly basis for 100 days. So what powerful, beautiful, resilient, strong people. Healthcare workers. I digress, but many of the healthcare workers have been working for 3 months now, more than 3 months, without pay. And many, not many, all of them, 100%, without exception, have lost someone significant or something, and usually both, like their lives, their livelihood, their entire civilization. But having said that, yeah, I mean, they would say that, and that's the other thing was bombs. I mean, I was in a new kind of hospital kind of complex that was built during COVID to isolate COVID patients, right? So, and it was relatively close to the bombing. So every time a bomb would drop, the whole place would shake, and you could feel it. Eventually, believe it or not, you got used to it. Honestly, I got used to it. But the bombs are going every 2-3 hours, usually in the morning, early morning hours before sunrise. I don't know why the Israeli forces picked that time to bomb, but usually it was before sunrise in the morning, or what they call Fajr time. But basically, every time the bombs would come, they would say, you know what, give it about 15 minutes, the mass casualties will start coming in now. And indeed, they did come. And when they came in, Anuj, it was just massive, and I'd never seen this before. It was just massive chaos. There was like women and children and boys and uncles and grandfathers all over with major orthopedic injuries, head trauma, lacerations, soft tissue injuries. Many of them were like all in like rubble, and so they would come in. Obviously, there's not enough beds, so they'd be on the floor, just kind of coalesced on the floor, and then the emerge docs would be doing everything they could to kind of get them out, suturing them on the floor. So it was like mass chaos. You have this classic, what I call the Palestinian or the shrapnel face of Gaza, where you get these multiple red dots all over or red spots all over the face. Each spot usually has a piece of metal, concrete, stone in each spot. And what would also happen is that when you're in an explosive situation, you don't know what's happening. So you don't close your eyes. Your eyes remain open. And, God's given us what's called fight and flight response, where your eyes open up. it's done so you can see what's going on. And so their eyes would open up, and of course the shrapnel would go in and hit their eyes. So I would argue 90% of them had eye injuries, right? And had facial lacerations and trauma. And so often these eye injuries go undiagnosed because people are worried about abdominal injuries, about orthopedic injuries, about head trauma. You don't look at the eyes, right? Whereas they all have eye injuries. So, I mean, you had the shrapnel, ripping eyes apart. I mean, that's when I told you I took about 10 eyeballs out that were just ripped apart. And the age ranges were like age 2, age 6, 10, 11, I think it was 13, 14, 17.
And did you at the time have access to like at least basic supplies? Was there anesthetic available? Like, what was?
Well, the European Gaza had enough for general anesthesia, from what I understand. Because a lot of these patients had to be put to sleep. So when I take somebody's eye out, we're able to put them to sleep. When they did amputations, they had enough for general anesthetic. But of course, local anesthetic was in short supply. Sometimes it emerged to save on local anesthetic for the bigger surgeries. It's all about efficiencies, right? They would do it without anesthesia in emerge to suture an arm laceration, right? Because they want to economize the use of the anesthetic. Antibiotics are a huge shortage. That's why I'll come back to this. Infections rampant. So, for example, if you get a big fracture, there'd be people, because a hospital only has 250 beds, there's 1,000 people without beds on the floor. They have these orthopedic devices sticking from their legs. They'd get infected because the conditions are not so sterile. And so if you survived amputation the first time, you'd get it a second time because things would get infected. The antibiotics are not sufficient or not there. And in order to save somebody's life, you'd have to cut the leg off, right? So a lot of the amputations were happening after the initial injury because the limb, whether it's an arm or a leg, gets infected, right? Eyeballs as well. So, I mean, we had enough to put them to sleep, but we didn't have the proper equipment to do a proper job, like I would hair. We didn't have any implants. Sutures were of low supply. Antibiotics, of course, as I mentioned, were also of low supply. Painkillers. They didn't have enough painkillers. And so what they did was they would save the painkillers for the really, really big procedures. Everybody else would have to suffer. And I mean, I would walk the wards with people on the floor. Some had a bed, and I would walk the floor, and they'd have all kinds of injuries. And, I mean, they'd be in pain, but I mean, gosh, they're not on pain control. I mean, if it was here, I'd expect them to be screaming their lungs out in pain, but they took it. And I was surprised, like they took the pain. They considered it. I was speaking to somebody, one of the doctors. I mean, the literacy rate in Gaza is 95%, right? So they're all educated. So many of them speak English. But, one of the doctors told me, you know what? The Palestinians consider pain as a test of faith, right? And they consider that, if they can take the pain, then God will bless them. Because it's basically a test of their faith, right?
I find that...
So they took the pain.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but just say I find that incredibly sad because that feels like a collective coping mechanism that is just birthed out of circumstance, right? On an entire population. It's not something that it's natural to scream in pain, right? And albeit, individuals may have different pain thresholds and whatnot, but that it becomes a way to sort of explain it to oneself in that situation. And this is a thing. I mean, as you'd rightly said, this is being broadcast in 4K. Everybody has got constant live streams of some or other incomprehensible tragedy at all times. And yet it's so hard so I'm having a little bit of a hard time keeping it together, if I'm honest. I want to come back just for a moment. Like, I'm going to go way back. You had this conversation with your friend, and he said he's going to Gaza. You had told him that you are really deeply affected by what you're seeing. Right around the same time, I had a conversation much like that with a friend of mine. He and I agreed. We were both in a pretty dark place for it, not knowing what to do about it. And I think many, many people feel that, not knowing what to do. You you voiced it, this opportunity kind of presented itself. You seized this opportunity where probably 99.99% of other people wouldn't. And now here you are in the middle of all this, seeing what's happening. At any point while you were there, did you have an opportunity to look up and say, what am I doing here? Like what am I really doing here? And did you almost have to pinch yourself to even just check if this was real?
I mean, yes and no. When I was there, I look back at it, I became one of them, like one of the doctors. They welcomed me so much. They were so warm and friendly that I clicked with them right away. And I don't mean to say that by me being able to identify their pain means that I don't have the same pain as them. Of course not. What I mean to say is that, I became one of them. I identified with them. We're in the suffering together at that moment in time, right? So when patients would come in, we'd go and we'd look for facial lacerations, which is what I do, facial trauma. We'd go look for eye trauma. And, even while they're working on, I saw this one 10-year-old, maybe 8 to 10-year-old girl, right? Her foot, fresh bombing. Can you imagine it? I never imagined I would ever tell somebody it was a fresh bombing. I mean, it's bizarre what kind of world we live in where I've used the term naturally several times that there was a fresh bombing. But there's a fresh bombing. This 8 to 10-year-old girl came in, and she's screaming in agony because it just happened, and she's crying like any 8-year-old girl would cry or kid would cry. And basically the skin, I guess they pulled her from the rubble, right? And the skin from her leg and her foot is ripped off, and you can, no fracture I believe, but you can see bone, right? And so they're cleaning it, so they're dosing it with alcohol to disinfect. And of course, she's screaming because alcohol is painful. And she's screaming, and the parents are holding her down. And we go there, and because she's a child, we said, let's just look at her eye and make sure it's okay. The eye was okay. There was some shrapnel in the eye, but we didn't think it was deep. But we said, let them deal with the injury first, and then we'll see her later on. So I would do all these rounds, but I was one of them. And we just kept on working from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. We would work, and then I would go in and have dinner with them. And they'd cook for me whatever food they had. They would cook for me. The doctors would, right? Because they've all lost their homes. They're all living in these rooms in the hospital, and sometimes with their families, and sometimes not. So I mentioned that, when I was here, I suffered tremendously. We all did, with their suffering, with the pain and feeling helpless, right? And I told my family this, when I was there, I actually felt better. Even though I was seeing the trauma live, I was seeing the suffering live, I was experiencing their struggle, and they're listening to them so calmly say that how their lives have been destroyed, their house is gone, friends gone, 85% of the entire Gaza Strip has been flattened, right? But I basically, I would still hear them say all these things, but then go on looking after patients, go on talking and about this, that, the other, and I don't know how they're able to carry a normal conversation. I became part of that. So therefore, I felt better because I was actually there, right? And that's why I told my family, I said, I actually don't feel bad, even though I'm hearing everything live, I'm actually there with them. So I think, in my opinion, after going all over the world, if I can say one thing about the Palestinian people, is that they're the most, I can say without a doubt, they're the most resilient, courageous, and generous people I've ever met. And they have such strong faith that I think that was infectious, okay? So because their resilience and their faith is so strong, it infected me with that. I really think that, because in their presence, I was calm, and weirdly, I felt reassured. There is hopelessness, don't get me wrong. I mean, you go to the camps, because I was talking to the doctors, right? And it's a different subset of people, but you go to the camps and people are walking sometimes aimlessly around, like they're in continuous shock, like what the heck has happened, right? Almost like PTSD, or I shouldn't say post-traumatic, current traumatic disorder. I mean, they're going through it as we speak, so it's not post-traumatic yet. It will be eventually, and God knows what's going to happen to their mental health at that point in time.
It's strange when you read the news, when you see how things are covered, how they're talked about, there's something about a story in particular. I think I'm personally biased on this. I think that humanity has spread and has advanced and has, kind of conquered the planet largely, and perhaps
at what cost?
Largely because of our ability to tell each other stories, right? And some of those stories are good and they have positive outcomes. Many of those stories are bad and they have negative outcomes for someone. But when we think about sitting here, thousands of kilometers away at the distances that we are in, in a life of what seems like unimaginable comfort compared to that, you hear about the numbers. It was 5,000, then 10,000, then 20,000 people killed. But that metric is not even remotely the whole story, right? Because I don't even know if there's any way of fully accounting reasonably well about the number of injuries, right? Injuries that are life-altering, plus people losing their homes, plus the, as you mentioned, the disease to come. You have a generation or generations of people that if everything stopped tomorrow, like a light switch, the war stopped tomorrow, it would still take generations to come out of this trauma of the people that have been through it. And yet while you were there, I saw that, you'd kind of posted about some, moments of hope and glimmer in the middle of all this. Like there was I think it was a gentleman that was kind of giving out candy or something like that at one point. Like, how are you finding beyond people's faith? Like, how are people coping? Not the healthcare professionals, but the people going through this. How are they themselves finding ways to cope in this?
Well, I think besides their tremendous faith that everything will be okay, I think they don't have time right now. Their life existence is hour to hour, day to day. They don't have time to think about tomorrow. I was there and I was speaking to the doctors, and I didn't have these kind of conversations with the non-physicians, but I was speaking to doctors and the residents that were there, and they are talking about, they would talk about the future. After the war, they'll do this, they'll need that. They want to get this special training or that training. Can you help us with this? We'll need you to help us with this training or that training. But then they'd backtrack, right? Because it's like being hopeful once the war is over and being hopeless because you don't know what's going to be left behind. Mm-hmm. So the Israeli forces have destroyed 85% of their civilization. Universities gone. These are all war crimes, but I'll let the UN and people that deal with this talk about that. But there's universities gone, there's hospitals gone, sewage systems, sanitation, bakeries, chicken farms are attacked or bombed, and so you can't find eggs in the Gaza Strip. I think maybe somewhere south, but most of Gaza, you can't find eggs because they bomb chicken farms. Drama places for like opera house type things, entertainment, restaurants, schools. All the schools have been eliminated, and you've seen this on TikTok videos and on the news of how the Israeli forces and soldiers have punched holes in blackboards and made funny TikTok videos out of that. Mm-hmm. They see all this. So imagine if you're sitting there, you see these soldiers, where you studied, where you went to school, mocking. That must hurt. Now, that didn't come up, but I know they see it because mm-hmm. they kind of talk about it, but I didn't find them, the average folk, to be vindictive, to be really angry. I think they were just sad. And I think they're just kind of numb in what's going on, calm in all of this, because they have no other choice. They feel abandoned by humanity. They do. They feel abandoned by everybody. They feel abandoned by even the UN and other international agencies, which is true. The response by some of these agencies has been poor. Response by many countries has been poor. They are touched by the response of the world, of the average person, of the millions, billions, one mm-hmm. would say, that have responded. They know this, and I asked them, and they're touched by that. And they really are touched. But on the other hand, it hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
The bombing still goes and goes and goes. So to come back to your early on question, is that if the war stops now, basically the amount of amputations I've seen In one day I saw 15 amputations, and these are young children, okay? And not just a single amputation, multiple limb amputations, right? Arm, leg, two legs, is in the tens of thousands, okay? And this is not like Canada where we have wheelchair accessibility, where we have prosthetics, we have physiotherapy and whatnot. It's not like that at all. They predict that a child who gets an amputation, okay, will need an average of 9 to 10 operations, because you have to revise the stump and you have to do this. And even when you get a prosthetic fit, I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, but even when you get a prosthetic fit, you'll have to revise and do surgery. So they may need, on average, they need about 9 to 10 procedures by the time they're an adult, okay? The amount of kids that have lost limbs and have been permanently injured is in the tens of thousands, 60,000, people who've been blinded, right? And not only that, and this is all real, like I saw this with my own eyes, but they've lost their support system. Fathers, mothers, grandfathers, uncles, aunts, they're all gone. They're all killed, right? So who's going to take care of them? Like, who's going to take care of all these people? And indeed, the average age of Gaza is 18. Mm-hmm. Even when I was in the camp, kids everywhere. But there are indeed kids. So it's logical, if you drop a 2,000 dumb bomb, which is a gift from the U.S. to Israel, it's a weapon of mass destruction. You're going to kill a lot. And, people, the plastic surgeon there told me that there's a particular kind of drone that Israel uses. So first of all, Israel is testing apparently a lot of new weapons because it has a defense industry.
Right. Yep.
So to have a label battle tested is a big sell for buyers. So they're testing all this stuff in the Gaza Strip. So they have this one drone called the Hellfire drone. Apparently the Hellfire drone, when it explodes, it has these casings that are in the form of discs, from what was described to me, and they go everywhere. And these discs basically are designed to cause maximum damage. And what they do is they basically create amputations in unusual spots. So usually in most explosive situations, if an amputation happens, it happens at the joint. So the knee, the elbow, right? So this specialized drone causes these disc-shaped shrapnel to go everywhere, and basically it causes amputations at unusual spots like mid-thigh, mid-arm, which makes it even worse. I mean, I saw a 17-year-old boy that did an above-groin amputation. I was speaking to orthopedic surgeons, and unfortunately they did it, but they don't survive, and indeed that boy died. They tried to save his life by doing the amputation, but he died.
It's easy for us to kind of lose sight of the people, and that's actually what I don't want to do. And if anything, that's what I really, I'm so deeply humbled just meeting you, just knowing that there's somebody who just not just gives a damn about humanity, but you're really living. You did not need to be there. You may feel otherwise, you may feel compelled otherwise, but if I can say so, from my humble, somewhat pseudo-objective perspective, you did not need to be there, and yet you went. And, the fact that there is still that level of humanity, amongst the people that however few or however many they may be, is incredible. How do you, having seen what you've seen, I know you may not have had that quiet time to fully process this, how's your relationship with humanity changed, if at all? What did you feel 3 months ago about the world, and what do you feel today?
I think as the war went on after October 7th, October 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, November, December, as the killing and the slaughter and the massacres got higher and higher, and nobody did anything, the Western countries who espoused freedom and justice stayed quiet. Voices were quieted down early on in a very aggressive way. And the killing, and basically the Israeli forces, nobody stopped them. Nobody's still stopping them, mind you. The U.S. kept on giving them more bombs, kept on passing bills, $14 billion package, not an aid package, a military package with more bombs. Israeli politicians admitted that without replenishing, they will run out. But yet the U.S. kept on replenishing them during the war. And mainstream media was completely shut. And mainstream media was basically gave a very skewed opinion on what's going on, didn't talk about the war. Mainstream media was not accurate in its reporting. It really, like from every angle, the world abandoned these people. Like nobody came. So that really shattered my faith in humanity. It really did. I was very despondent. A lot of us were. But talking about me personally, I lost a lot of faith. A lot of people that I admired, icons and titans and whatever, I have no respect for them, because the thing is, if we espouse human rights, it should be human rights for all, right? No matter who is suffering. And there's a lot of suffering in the world, right? There is. But we talk about human rights, we talk about selective human rights. And, when it's convenient to you. And, the other thing was, so many things came up at that time, Anuj, in so many different ways. There was, one, Palestinian children are not equal to other kinds of children. If you look a certain way, well, you know what? You are not equal to somebody else, right? So even that became very glaring, right? The hypocrisy of the Western world became very glaring. And, the Palestinians feel, even the Arab world and the Muslim world, countries, not people, they felt that they were abandoned by everybody. They have been abandoned. They are abandoned by everybody, right? So all that, I must admit, shattered my faith in humanity. In that I said, you know what, this is like, and I felt despondent for the world and for my children. I said, what kind of world are we? We're supposed to be progressing. There's supposed to be more justice, not less justice, right? But after 3 months and after actually going there, even though their suffering is tremendous, and I still, being here, I still suffer when even today, a refugee camp was bombed. And I know what's going to happen, and I've seen it. Children will come. Just like I saw, a mother carrying her 9 or 10-year-old child, asking people to check his pulse, but he's already dead, cold and dead. But she's screaming to check his pulse, right? I know what's going to be coming right now. People will go up and get amputated. And the last day I was leaving, there was a UN worker who worked for the UN. She was a 37-year-old woman, must be. She was sheltering in a building which was bombed, okay? She lost her 7-year-old daughter, her sister, and somebody else. And she had a 2-year-old baby boy, I think it was. And in the whole midst of chaos, she had to go up to the OR, and they amputated one leg. So we stayed behind because some of the orthopedic surgeons who came with the NGO knew her through UN work. And so they felt compelled to stay up all night on the night we're leaving to operate on her. But her baby boy, who's 2 years old, in the midst of the panic, got left there for 2 hours. And he had a head trauma, a subdural hemorrhage. Somebody finally found him and took him, and I think neurosurgeon that was there took him. And I don't know what happened to him because we had left. She was up in the OR, had one leg amputated. So that's going to happen now. I know that's happening. So even today, things only got worse. Nasser Hospital was evacuated. It's raining now. When I was there, it didn't rain. And they're saying, that it's God's blessing that it's been a good winter for us. So even though they're homeless, they're still thanking God that it's been a good winter, right? But now it's raining. And so they're going in the rain, and you've seen the pictures of them going in the rain and all the disease that's going to spread and the discomfort, and they don't deserve this, right? The majority are kids, because I see kids running around everywhere. But having said that, going there, my biggest hope is really, the Gen Z, people in their 20s and early 30s who've come alive, who are much more intelligent than us older folks, who are much more inclined towards justice and human rights, and are much more aware and seek out other sources to get their information, and not just mainstream media. And they're energized for justice for all, right? And they're energized for justice in particular for the Palestinians. Because at this point in time, and I will say this, that the occupation has to end, right? And I will say that, first of all, ceasefire right now, stop this, but the occupation has to end. That's the final solution. They have to have dignity and the right to exist, right? But beyond that, I think one thing that gave me hope in humanity was that when I saw these young people in their 20s and early 30s from all backgrounds, all faiths and colors and countries, in the millions,
Yeah.
fighting for justice. I say, you know what? In 15, 20 years from now, when they take over the world, right, as they will, that's life, and we're old and retired or whatever, and I hope I'm alive, then maybe we'll see that justice. I hope we see it sooner, right? But at least I know we'll see it because their generation is energized. So when I came back from Gaza, that gave me hope again.
I still I cling to this idea. I believe it to be true that all, regardless if you're black, white, brown, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, whatever label you want to attach to a human, I think generally most people want the same thing. If you really dig deep, I'm not talking at the material surface level, but generally people want peace, they want security, they want food on the table, they want to be able to just know that their immediate world is safe. And I think that's irrespective of who they are.
Well, that's, sorry to interject, but the Palestinians are an ancient culture.
Right.
There's Muslims, Christians, and Jews, right? Palestinians. They're an ancient culture, and exactly, that's all they want, right? They have dreams and hopes, and they want peace and security. They want to be able to raise their kids and enjoy life and live life. That's exactly, and that's these were normal people,
right?
That I interact with. They're just like you and I, and that's all they want. So give them the chance, right?
Absolutely.
Give them that chance to live with dignity and be independent.
I think what gets in the way of that is unfortunately just we find ways to divide people, sometimes which for what seem like trivial reasons to begin with, and then those divisions exasperate, and then we create these incentive structures in a way that fractures society further, right? Like instead of seeing that this other person, two people of two different backgrounds might both love the same sport, or they have the same interests and passions in music or whatnot. Like there's something human that I believe that conversation is the one tool that we have left to make the world better. Every other tool for the most part is destructive. And we are, just by design, the species that we are, we will never agree on everything. And if, in my humble opinion, if we agreed on everything, we'd be pretty boring and we'd probably have been long gone as a species. It's that diversity of opinion and thinking and whatnot that really matters, but we allow it to separate ourselves from one another, which is the thing that I think is really, really the tragedy here. And I'm not asking this question at a political level in terms of, what, two state, one state. That's not the spirit of the question at all. How do we move past this? Like, how do we reconcile with the people who are suffering and with ourselves for allowing this to happen?
I think the only way to reconcile this is to move forward. I think that people who've done this have to be held accountable. That's common sense. I think people who've done this have to be held accountable, for sure. But beyond that, and that's for the courts to decide, for the UN and the international courts to decide that and how to do it and when to do it and whatever. But I think going forward, there has to be a ceasefire, and people have to seriously, for the first time ever, talk with regards to a resolution. And the only resolution really is to give these Palestinian people freedom, right? They've been occupied for 75 years. That can't go on. You know what I mean? And and if you look at history, right? Any kind of sort of colonial type project has eventually come to an end. And so I really think, in my opinion, Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side at peace. I really think so. I'm very optimistic. And I think but we have to actually want that. Because without that, I don't see any peace. I just see more suffering, more killing, more war, right?
It really struck me in the last few months, but few weeks in particular, how much difference leaders make. It is always an obvious thing, but I feel like even the most well-meaning population seems pretty quickly be hijacked by bad leadership. And sometimes it feels like there's very little good leadership anywhere right now. There's some places where it's far worse. But what would you, if you had the audience with, some of the most powerful leaders in the world, with everything that you've seen, just as a human being, if you could have their attention right now and you could look them eye to eye, what would you say to them?
Justice and humanity. I mean, look at humanity and justice. I'd open their eyes to the suffering of the Palestinian people. I'd say go visit them, talk to the average people, talk to them. I think a lot of people, even a lot of Israelis that I know, some of them are my friends, and even people of the Jewish faith that I've seen that have actually gone and spent time in the West Bank, have spent time with the Palestinians and talked to them, have come back changed, because you get to see how it is for them, what they experience on a daily basis, right? Once you see what the Palestinians have experienced on a daily basis for 75 years, you'll know that that's not justice, and there has to be some kind of justice, right? In the end, I hope humanity will prevail. I'm hopeful. But the only way for there to be peace is for both Israel and Palestine to coexist. I don't see any. I mean, I'm just an average Joe who really is a humanitarian. And to me, a patient is a patient is a patient, no matter what background they come from. If they need to be healed, I will heal them, no matter where I am and where they are and who they are. I don't even think twice about that at all. It's not even it's just what I do. But having said that, just as an average Joe, it's logical that this will continue forever unless both sides learn to coexist peacefully together.
Just to flip that question a little bit, if you had the audience with 50 kids right now, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, half Palestinian, half Israeli Jewish kids, what would you say to them?
You're all the same. You are exactly the same. We're all human beings. So we all have the same interests and same likes. We may speak different languages. We may look different, but we're all the same. We're all equal. We're all in this together. We're all in this world together, right? And just respect each other, respect each other, respect the differences, look at what things are similar, right? The occupation's got to end. That's the only way you'll have peace. You have to give them dignity, and you have to give them a state where they can live in freedom and dignity and be productive and raise their kids and raise generations and exist peacefully with Israel side by side. This is, I think, what I'm saying is what most people believe, right? Now, will that translate to leaders? I pray that there's strong leaders out there that will be visionary and will be able to make that change. We haven't seen that yet. Maybe in the past we had some glimmer and maybe some leaders, but it hasn't happened for a long time. So I don't know where it's going to happen. So that's why I'm hoping that the current generation of people who are in their 20s, when they become leaders, they'll remember this and they'll say, you know what, justice first and humanity first, right? And they'll make the right decisions, I hope.
Yasser, you have been beyond generous with your time. Where can people find out more about you and what's important to you, just so that they can kind of hopefully come to some of the realizations and internalize some of the things that you've shared here?
All this has fallen on my lap. I never really kind of expected this. I just do what I do because, I'm for the purpose of doing it, which is really to help people stop suffering. That's why I do it. It motivates me. It inspires me to do more. It inspires me to be a better human being and a better father for my children. And that's all.
I think this is the last question. Your patients know, or do most of your patients know, where you were and come back, and how have they received you? How have they, has it taken people by surprise? Like, do people even know how to react?
A lot were surprised. A lot saw me on TV, and they said, "I saw you on TV." And but almost all my patients, like, who have seen me. So a lot of my patients have seen me, and but I'd say almost all of them, and if not all of them, have been really proud, have been very impressed, have thanked me for going, and have just said that they really respect what I did. So they've all looked at it in a very positive way, and that's been actually very encouraging for me. I've never had that happen because I've done a lot of missions, and most people don't know about it, right? Because it doesn't make the news, or it's not publicized. I don't have a website where I put them all on, for example, and so there's no way you can find out what I do. And this is what I prefer. I prefer to do things quietly in the background because, I want to make sure that my intentions are clear and sincere, right? Gaza is different because it's so topical. It's everywhere. People are talking about it. A lot of millions of people have been affected by this indirectly or directly. And also, I felt that given everything going on, if I can be a voice for the people of Gaza to educate the world of their suffering and to stop all of this, then so be it, right?
Right. Well, I mean, for what it's worth, and I can appreciate and respect you kind of working in anonymity and just doing the right thing, but you can't be what you can't see. And somewhere out there, someone's going to see you and just be inspired to do whatever it is that they can do in some way to make the world a better place. Yasser, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're out. You've been listening to the AwokenWord podcast, or at least I think you have. Or maybe it just came on and you left the room, and right now I'm talking to no one. But on the off chance that you actually did listen to the entire episode and you liked what you heard, there's a lot of ways that you can support AwokenWord. First of all, definitely subscribe to the podcast. We are available on all major podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And of course, all of this content is available on our website at www.awokenword.com. You can also connect with us over social media. On Instagram, we are at AwokenWord Podcast. On YouTube, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter, we are at AwokenWord. If you've liked what you've heard, definitely spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your parents, tell your siblings, tell the crazy half-naked guy in the apartment across the street. Tell your pet iguana. If you feel like spreading the word amongst some ferns, go for it. However you see fit, spread the word. Like many others, we're trying to build a better world through meaningful conversation. And if you'd like to discuss any of the topics or the conversations that we've had here in your own podcasts, please feel free to do so. If you have questions, if you have recommendations for new guests or new topics, definitely do reach out. As always, thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Anuj. Peace out.